Welcome, everyone. Thank you for your presence. It's good to see all of you online. And it's such a precious time to be able to just be together in a peaceful yet concentrated fashion. These past weeks, during the time of quarantine, I found that it's been most peaceful and restorative to have moments of sitting. And so this is very precious that we're able to do this together. So to begin, I'd like to invite everyone to come to a comfortable sitting position, whether you're on the floor or in a chair. We're going to have a brief guided meditation for us to ground ourselves in the present moment, in our body. So please make sure you're in a comfortable position. Your torso is spacious so that your breath can come in and out easily. You may like to close your eyes and just follow the sound of my voice and the sound of the bell. Breathing in, aware that I'm breathing in. Breathing out, aware that I'm breathing out. In, out. Breathing in, becoming aware of the entire length of the in-breath. Breathing out, aware of the entire length of the out-breath. Entire length in, entire length out. Breathing in naturally, I've become aware that my breath has become more calm. Breathing out naturally, I've become aware that my breath has become more at ease. Calm, at ease. breathing in, aware that I'm breathing in with all of my ancestors, my mother, my father, and all of the ancestors before them. Breathing out, aware that I'm breathing out with all of my descendants. In with my ancestors. Out with my descendants. Good morning, everyone, and to all the mothers and fathers, happy Mother and Father's Day today. It's been a real blessing to be in connection with all of our Sangha members during this time. This time of disconnect has forced us to look more carefully at and more deeply at how we need to nurture this connection in different ways. And I feel very grateful that our particular tradition has a strong emphasis on community of Sangha, and that we already have a wealth of resources to tap into to continue to support one another, to do the very necessary work of healing, the very necessary work of looking more deeply in order for us to move forward on a better trajectory. So today we are going to explore our habits, especially during this time of change. Many of us have had to take on different activities, different roles, had to tap into different resources, not by our choosing, but because COVID has brought this to us. And I recognize very clearly that there is such a spectrum of experiences with regard to this pandemic. Some of us have the conditions to quarantine quite easily and safely. Some of us have had to, because of it, be out there and become more susceptible to stressors for our health, for our mental health as well. And so this sharing today is in recognition that we are all holding this pandemic in different ways. And what may come easily for some of us does not necessarily translate to ease and opportunity for others. And as Earth holders especially, we recognize this connection of what is easeful for others and what is not easeful for others, so that we can do the work of holding a better container for all of us as we move forward. So I'd like to share my screen, and again, if you happen to see, not be able to see the screen and see my image, then please connect with Stephanie so that we can make sure that we are on the same page as everyone else. Okay. So can everyone see our new normal? Okay, good. So this is our focus here. We know that there are changes afoot, and it's in our best interest to make sure that we are in the right direction of tending to our good habits rather than letting the weeds of bad habits come up. As we all know, bad habits are very easy to allow to come up because we don't need to really do anything, and our stored consciousness will allow things to come up without our tending. So as a good gardener, we learn that there are certain tools of the Dharma that will help us tend to our good habits. We begin by reflecting on our connection with our ancestors and our descendants. For me, habits are often hard to move out of when we don't have enough energy and inspiration to look more deeply. And so it's fitting that today is Mother's Day and we have a chance to take some time to reflect on our very real connection with our mother, our father, and our ancestors, because they are the ground from which all of our actions stem. In our tradition, there's a strong emphasis on the understanding the stored consciousness and understanding the interrelated of our stored consciousness with the stored consciousness of everyone around us, including our ancestors. And one of the teachings and practices that I have found to be very useful in looking at my habit energies is to reflect on this interrelated nature of my habit energies with that of my parents. Right now in quarantine, I'm actually sharing with you from Florida because I'm visiting my parents right now and here with them for an extended period of time. And it's been a very helpful opportunity for us as a family to be in connection with one another and to reflect on this aspect of shared habit energies. And I say this with a smile because habit energies are both positive and negative. But the good news about our habit energies, as when we reflect on our own, sometimes very heavy karma, is that it's not just about me. It's not just about you. It's not about our capacities or our skillfulnesses or unskillfulnesses, but it is a manifestation of the habits, the skills, the talents, the lessons learned or not yet learned that we have received from our parents and they from their parents and onward. So this is very helpful for us to carry this practice of transformation in a lighter way. It's not about us. It's about something much larger, and we are just doing our part to continue in a more beautiful way. So I'd like to ask you just to take a few moments to reflect on one of your parents, perhaps because today's Mother's Day, we can focus on mom. And to just reflect on the habits, perhaps 2 positive habits and 1 not so positive habit that we can see clearly in our mother, and we can see clearly in ourselves as it has been transmitted to us. We can take a minute to name it for ourselves, 2 positive habits and 1 not so positive. So when we reflect and hold our habits in this way, automatically it helps us to connect with something that's larger than ourselves. And our teacher has shared that this is also an antidote to pride. In the case where it is a good habit, we are a good talent, we do not hold that as our own accomplishment, but we recognize that the causes and conditions have come before us, through our parents and through their parents. And so this is one way we can help to look more directly at our good and bad habits without the burden of guilt or without the burden of pride. When we look to our ancestors and our descendants, many of us here may have children, may be embedded in an extended family, and we also see not only that we have received, but that we are also the source, the causes and conditions for the happiness and suffering of the younger ones who come after us. It also helps to inspire us to look more squarely at our habit energies. And it gives rise to this question: how do we want to continue? And I like that when you look at the word me and you flip the M, it becomes we. So how do we, as a continuation in this lineage, from my grandparents to my mother, to myself, to my spiritual children, to your children, how do we want to continue given these habit energies that are streaming through us? It may seem like a very elementary question, but truthfully, in our daily lives, sometimes the way we live our life, it is so crowded and busy, we don't have a chance to really sit down and ask ourselves this question. And so in our day to day, we continue to walk or stumble through these habits that trip us up without setting a clear intention and having clear practices to embrace and transform them. So this is a very important question to pause on. If we can begin to answer this question, how do we want to continue in light of our habits, then the path forward becomes clear. So one of the doors that opens up when we begin to ask this question is to explore more deeply in a concrete way the Four Noble Truths. And in modern day, we know that the second noble truth, which is that there are causes and conditions to suffering, not only that there is a suffering, perhaps a big morass of suffering, but there are actual causes and conditions that we can look more deeply into it. It then calls on us to do the practice of looking more deeply and really naming for ourselves what it is that we are suffering from. So this pandemic has brought us all to slow down and stop in certain ways. And it's been my experience that when I have a sudden shift in energy, that habitual way that I use my energy now looks for different ways to be used. And for many of us, we turn to consumption. We turn to feeding our senses in ways that can use up that energy. It's kind of like the image of a puppy dog that doesn't know what to do with its energy, so it romps around. But as human beings, we are very, very clever with the ways that we find to make use of our energy in the most gratifying and quick way. And consumption through our senses is one of the modern day ills that uses up so much of our energy. So how many of us here are finding that in our free time, quote unquote free time, meaning the energy, the time that we have had to shift because of these changes of quarantining, that we've begun to consume other things, maybe in an immoderate way. Reflect. Some of us may already have a very clear perspective and not fallen into this trap. But for many of us, and for many young people, consumption is a way out, and it's a very big trap. And so this is what we, when we talk about binge watching. In the news, people share what their coping mechanisms are, and I was very surprised to see that people were actually encouraging people to finally sit down and binge watch the whole series of what or what not that you haven't had a chance to do. That kind of thinking is that now we have free time, let's consume. So this is an example of a way that we take in through the senses in an immoderate way. And of course, we know that when we are immoderate in the way we consume, or immoderate in anything, it takes up more space and more time and more energy from the things that perhaps would be more beneficial for us to focus on. Another modern day ill, how we work. Those of us who are have a habit of turning to work for fulfillment, and in particular when other avenues are closed to us, we may find that this really becomes a feeder of bad habits rather than good. Again, are we working? Are we putting energy, time, space, and effort into our work in a way that is moderate? Or does it have the flavor of kind of consumption? Are we consuming our work? And both of these areas of consumption and work, they get to something more basic in how we relate to our emotions. For some of us, it may be anxiety about the future. For some of us, it may be grief or hurt from the past that we have not yet been able to hold and be with directly. And so we turn to consumption, we turn to work as a way to handle our emotions, but not in the way of the Dharma, in the way of distraction. The good news is that when we are able to just recognize what we are doing and start to be able to name why, it's already the turning of the second noble truth. It's already a way of taking care of, holding, embracing, and beginning to transform that habit of running away or running towards without looking more deeply. And I'm so glad that I see in our forum here today, there are many of us who have been participating in the Earth Holder retreat. And we've been speaking of the importance of connecting the dots between our personal actions. Here we can say our personal habits, and connecting the dots with societal and global actions, because we know that just like a nesting doll, one contains the energy, the intention, the consequences of the next level of interaction. And if we as individual practitioners have a solid hold on our practice of transforming our habits, we will have a foundation to help on a more global level, a societal, a global transformation. Rather than just calling for change outside, we are doing the necessary work of looking more deeply into our immediate gratifications or our immediate pains, looking more deeply to understand the causes and conditions that will help us, motivate us to change. So I'm very glad that we do have this space to continue to do that work. So the Noble Truths, they are always there to guide us in the right direction of not running away, but turning inward. Not so that we cause more pain, but so that we can be more effective doctors for ourselves. So, when we look at our habit energies, especially when it's a bad habit, it's helpful to remember the teaching of interdependence. We touched upon this briefly when we were talking about our ancestry and our descendants, that we do not ourselves only hold the causes and conditions for a habit to be there, but that there are causes and conditions before us, causes and conditions after us. And when it comes to our habits, this is good news, because it means that the iron is always hot. You know the saying, strike while the iron is hot. Well, the good news is the iron is always hot. The iron is always up for being, not to be violent, but to be struck. There's always something of a cause or a condition that we can take care of, practice with, look into in order to help embrace and transform our bad habit. Or in the case of a good habit, in order to acknowledge, recognize, and appreciate this good habit and nurture it in the right direction. So it's just like a plant. Recently in our compost bin in the backyard, unbeknownst to my mother and father and me, there was an avocado plant that was growing from a seed. And it had been sitting in the dark for a number of weeks and had on its own sprouted. And so when I came to turn the compost, I saw a sprout from a very big seed. And luckily the seed was big enough so that I could see it and recognize what it was. And know that it has its own strength, its own energy to grow, to live with the right conditions. So we took it and we replanted it in a larger pot on its own with more compost, and now we're actually concretely tending to it. It came up haphazardly, but knowing that it's something that we want to continue to nurture, we're taking good care to observe it every day, water it every day, shield it from too much sunlight, and observe how it comes up. So when we have the causes and conditions, we can look carefully through our practice of mindful awareness of what we are doing with our body, mindful awareness of how we are feeding ourselves with our thoughts and our emotions, to see what is being nurtured. If we see that there is joy, a natural joy in our life, then we take note of it and we learn how to nurture that joy. And if there is something that is causing us pain, suffering, disharmony, we also take time to reflect on the causes and conditions of that suffering. So whether it is something positive or negative, there is always something to put our hands into, to put our awareness, our attention into, to grow the causes and conditions towards nurturance or towards dissipation of our negative habit energy. So again, let us come back to that habit that we were able to recognize in ourselves and our mother. Let us name it for ourselves. And bring it to the forefront of this awareness of this teaching. This habit is because of what conditions? There is a way forward because there are so many conditions to any situation. Even something that seems so black and white. For example, I'll give you an example, my stubbornness. There are many causes and conditions for my stubbornness. And if I take the time to reflect on the causes and conditions, I will start to be able to embrace and transform them. Okay. Secondly, the iron is always hot. There are aspects of our habits that we can intentionally focus on. We touched on this in the Earth Holder retreat briefly, as it reflects on our practice of the 5 mindfulness trainings. So I'd like to, again, bring our attention to this because it's quite an important part of our capacity to transform, to maintain a good, healthy, wholesome boat for ourselves and for our loved ones, is our practice of the 5 mindfulness trainings. So practice, of course, implies that we are reviewing, reflecting, renewing our relationship with that object of our awareness. It requires that we bring our attention back to the habit. It requires that we set an intention to begin anew, to change something, to move forward with that habit. And it requires that we take concrete action and do what it is that we have intended to do. Whether we do it perfectly or imperfectly, most of the time it's imperfectly, but that's not the point. The point is that we engage in this continual circle of awareness, intention, action. It brings us to a deeper awareness, and then a resetting of intention. So whether we are focused on learning more about our habit, reflecting on the causes and conditions from our parents, for example, or we put our energy into setting a good intention. Now that I know that this suffering is there because of this habit of binging, of being immoderate in my work, of running away through consumption, of not recognizing, repressing my emotions, of not communicating with my loved ones, I am determined to try my best to take one concrete action in the direction of a more wholesome way. And if we need help to verbalize, visualize, and actualize our good intentions towards better habits, we need only to open up our 5 mindfulness training certificate and read them through the eyes, with the eyes of someone who is beginning anew. So that is why the iron is always hot. There's always somewhere that we can put our attention to, because we are not set in stone. The causes and conditions continue to come together, and as we work with them, the causes and conditions continue to change. And we have the capacity as organic gardeners to transform ourselves, to nurture ourselves in a more wholesome direction. In this time of COVID-19 quarantining, Earth holders are making the active connection between our reaction, response, our readiness to embrace the suffering of COVID and its parallels with the way we have not been able to do the same for the ongoing climate crisis. They say that COVID is just like the climate change, but on steroids. It means the effects are maybe a little bit more obvious and blatant, but we still behind in responding out of lack of understanding, lack of awareness for the global situation. So what has this got to do with our personal habits? This is the question that I hope is really smoldering, burning in your hearts, that we are all questioning what our personal transformation has to do with the global welfare. And it begins with very concrete things. So at the beginning of our session today, we begin with a meditation to ground ourselves in our bodies and not be theorizing, running after things that we are not actually practicing in and with ourselves, in and with our community. So today we will be having a Dharma sharing, and we're invited to continue to look concretely at these habits that we are giving the space and conditions to explore. As usual, we will have a BIPOC sanctuary space for those who would like to join. And we will also have a parents circle for any parents who would like to come together to share about their experiences and perhaps challenges and successes in practicing with good habits as a family or as a head of a family. Concretely, we would like to ask you if you feel courageous enough to reflect on and share out in a slightly more vulnerable way. Name those habits that you feel are the seat of ill-being for you. And to help one another in your sharing, connect the dots with the societal ills that we are seeing now. To give you an example, when we talk about consumption and our immoderate ways of consumption, we know that consumption has a lot to do with resources and the way that resources are being shared. And we also know that COVID is affecting marginalized communities in a much starker way than those who don't have the burden of certain stressors like poverty. So we are asking you in this Dharma sharing to share from a personal space, and then also to bring your awareness to a more collective space so we can together continue to connect the dots and to be inspired to know that our personal efforts have everything to do with the way we are able to move forward with COVID and the way we need to move forward with the climate crisis.